So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the National Academy of Sciences. I have to say, I am so pleased to see such a great turnout of people in our community who really care about the future of science in America. Hopefully, I will leave you with lots of things to think about after my presentation today. But to back up, a year ago, after I gave the first State of the Science address, I thought to myself, wow, would there be any reason to do a second one? After all, the metrics change very slowly. Well, I could not have been more wrong. With today's perspective, we realize that all of the issues we were facing last year have been replaced with new ones. New policies that have impact the state of science in America are being issued, revised, revoked, and replaced at such a fast and furious pace that I cannot guarantee that any of the numbers I'm going to show you today will actually still be relevant tonight or tomorrow. But one thing I will assure you, the actions I'm going to suggest for how to improve the state of the science in America will be fairly robust regardless of what the future brings in terms of 2026 budgets or policies. So let's start this presentation on where we agree. Everyone, whether it's scientists or non-scientists alike, wants U.S. science to be the world leader. By being the world leader, we can innovate and develop the future that we all want to see. My experience has been that when everyone agrees on that top-line goal, magic can happen. And the only debate is on how we get there. But of course, the elephant in the room right now is whether the drastic reductions in research budgets and new research policies across the federal agencies will allow us to remain a research and development powerhouse. Even here at the National Academies, we've been badly impacted by budget cuts, grant cancellations, conforming to new policies, etc. Thus, we are embarking on a radical new experiment in what conditions promote science leadership, with the U.S. being the treatment group and China is the control. I certainly hope that just like any other experiment, all results will be carefully monitored. They will be made instantly available, honestly reported, and a course correction will be instituted should these policies not turn out with that top line that we all agree we want to see. But regardless of what the budget proposals end up being for 2026, let me state succinctly up front that no matter what the final budget numbers, the U.S. is not on a sustainable path for global research leadership, and it has not been on such a path for quite a few years now. So, in framing this talk, I went back to a 2007 report that the National Academies issued called Rising Above the Gathering Storm. When this report was written, almost 20 years ago now, the handwriting was already on the wall. The exceptional authors of this very insightful study predicted exactly what would happen as knowledge and low-cost labor become widely available. And the answer was erosion in U.S. leadership. One of the elements of this report was a scenario that was called business as usual. This is one in which the U.S. continued to follow Vannevar Bush's Endless Frontier playbook, even as other nations around the globe eagerly followed our lead and wanted to implement the same model. In this scenario, the the authors of the report predicted that the U.S. would experience reductions in global share of R&D, research outputs, research workforce, and the ability to compete globally for the greatest minds. What I'm going to argue now is that last year's State of the Science report documented that each of those predictions have been borne out under the business as usual scenario. So first, U.S. share of R&D has declined. So the vertical line here shows when that report was put out. And it shows that when it was written, the U.S. invested more than twice as much as anyone else in R&D. And our next closest competitor wasn't even China at that time. And of course, today the situation is markedly different. The U.S. no longer dominates investment in R&D, and we've got lots of competition worldwide. Okay, the second prediction from the business as usual scenario is that U.S. would no longer lead in numbers of researchers and publication output. What I love about this analysis that I put up here is that it was conducted last year by our colleagues in Japan. And Japan did this study because they wanted to find out where are they in the pecking order of great R&D nations. Therefore, I don't expect, since the Japanese did this, that they were going to be in any way partial to China. And I expect they also would be quite clear-eyed about what was going on here in America. And what they found is China is leading in numbers of researchers, numbers of research papers, and numbers of top papers. Note that in two of those categories, the U.S. isn't even second. Okay, the third prediction, the last one, was from Rising Above the Gathering Storm, has also been confirmed. At the time that the committee wrote the report, interest from international students trained in the U.S. to stay here and contribute to our economy was still on the rise. International transplants are disproportionately responsible for U.S. Nobel Prizes and Fortune 500 companies. But within just a few years of Rising Above the Gathering Storm, that interest started to wane. Less so for India, but drastically for top Chinese scientists. Note that the reason for this loss in international talent is not just opportunities abroad, but challenges of obtaining visas here and unforced error on our part. So basically, all of the predictions from the business as usual scenario played out, and yet we did very little as a nation post-2007 to change the trajectory and blaze a new, more productive path that would allow us to get out ahead again and maintain R&D leadership. But Rising Above the Gathering Storm also had a second scenario, the pessimistic scenario. They presented a case of what the future might hold in a worst-case scenario. This pessimistic scenario is triggered by budget cuts in order to address other national priorities. It is further accelerated by U.S. researchers preferring to pursue their careers elsewhere, by changes mostly in tax law that discourage industry R&D investment, by skyrocketing regulations that divert time and dollars away from doing science. So, could any of that be happening today? Okay, so let's look at the first trigger. Other federal priorities limit science funding. So we all know what's happening with the budget. Science budgets, particularly those that fund the academic research community, are slated for drastic reductions in order to fund tax breaks and other priorities. Okay, the second trigger for the pessimistic scenario is attractive opportunities abroad drawing researchers away from the U.S. Uncertainties over the science budgets for next year coupled with cancellations of billions of dollars of already hard-won research grants, is causing an exodus of researchers from the U.S. The orange line here is, well, you can see these two lines. One is the exodus of scientists from America to the rest of the world, which is the blue line, and the orange line is the intake of foreign researchers to the U.S. You can see that they were moving last year mostly in sync with normal annual cycles. But then suddenly they started to diverge. And now we are seeing a much larger exodus of researchers from America than we're seeing researchers coming here. A very prominent U.S. researcher posted on social media that his grant had been canceled for no good reason. Within 30 minutes, he had a job offer from China. 30 minutes. In terms of lack of business incentives that lead to discouraged R&D investment by industry, the story is a little bit more mixed. New legal requirements that were in place in 2022 to 2025 have made it less desirable from a tax perspective to conduct R&D in the U.S. and have also increased the regulatory burden. But offsetting those were credits for new R&D startups. Currently, the first item on the list is being reconsidered in Congress and could be changed to restore a more R&D friendly tax environment for industry. And then the fourth trigger in the pessimistic scenario is that excessive regulations reduce research output. Well, this has been a fact of life for some time. 62% of all regulations imposed on researchers since 1991 have been issued in the last 10 years alone. Some of the regulations do not even pass the sniff test for payoff compared to effort. For example, we require full IRB or Institutional Review Board approval prior to sending out even voluntary surveys to Americans. We require extensive disclosure of financial interests that are entirely unrelated to the research being done. And we require approval of animal research experiments, even when they involve non-invasive use of the animals, or simple renewals of what had already been approved last year. And the problems with red tape go well beyond just regulatory compliance for researchers. International students and visitors can't even get a visa to come here. One international visitor who was at a recent meeting was being congratulated by his colleagues for having gotten a visa to come here, until he explained that he had been invited to the same meeting the year before, but it took him more than a year to get his visa to come to the meeting. International students graduating from U.S. institutions cannot get visas to stay here for work, and but we know that the administration has prioritized a reduction in regulatory burden, and I hope that that priority extends to the research regulation. In fact, I worry that the emphasis right now on waste, fraud, and abuse only leads to more regulations, as everyone is assumed guilty until proven innocent. So, Rising Above the Gathering Storm also predicted, if we found ourselves in this pessimistic scenario, and hopefully I've convinced you that we're right on the verge of that, they predicted what would happen to America R&D. They said that talent and investment would start to leave the U.S. The U.S. would lose out in global markets, and ultimately our standard of living would start dropping. Now, evidence suggests that we are experiencing those outcomes from the pessimistic scenario. For example, let's look at where the best science is being done. This is a chart that was put together by the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, Again, a group that I don't think would be showing preference to China or to the US. It tracks critical technologies and who is in the lead. For these technologies, they span topics such as materials, manufacturing, AI, energy, quantum, biotech, sensing, and defense. China leads the race in all high-risk critical areas and in most of the medium and low-risk ones as well. Foreign multinationals begin to dominate the global markets was another prediction. Well, in 2002, before that report was written, the U.S. could lay claim to half of the global Fortune 500 companies. But now China dominates in the global Fortune 500. I would argue we don't want to wait until U.S. standard of living starts to decrease to do something about this situation. We need to act now. This is a much more serious situation than I even anticipated last year. The Endless Frontier from Vannevar Bush provided us with a solid 60 or more years during which U.S. science was the undisputed world leader. Unless we want the 21st century to be the China century, we need to innovate, something that the U.S. is actually pretty good at. And we need to apply that innovation to our own science system. So before I start talking about what the changes are that we need to make, let's look at a SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, for the U.S. research system. In reimagining a improved U.S. innovation system, we want to build on the strengths, we want to correct the weaknesses, take advantage of opportunities, and avoid the threats. In terms of strengths, we still have a really strong culture of innovation here. We have world-leading universities. We should be promoting, not punishing. We have a strong industrial R&D base, and equally important, we have the capital that can move good ideas to new products and solutions. We have a history of returning $5 to the economy for every dollar spent on research. Whatever we do, we should not enact policies that diminish any of those strengths. But we also have some weaknesses. Our own below-par education system that doesn't adequately prepare students for the current environment. We have no research strategy that involves the many funders and the many performers of research. We've got too many regulations, too much dependence on foreign talent, low trust in science, primarily among conservative voters. These are all unforced, self-imposed errors we need to turn around without torpedoing our strengths. In terms of threats, we can't change the fact that there's now more competition from other nations following our lead. We set a good example. No surprise, they wanted to do the same thing. And it is only expected that once all the easy science experiments are done, that new experiments to push the boundaries of understanding require more complex instrumentation and more expensive research facilities. But herein are also opportunities. We can use the rise of science prowess internationally to create better partnerships to support the burden of cost for all of those expensive facilities. We can also seize on the anti-regulatory agenda of the administration to cut the burden that weighs down our scientific productivity. There is much to work with here, so what are some of the actions we should take now to build a better research enterprise and regain U.S. leadership? Oh, and that's what we need to do. Okay. So, action number one is we have to build on our culture of innovation to come up with a new and better model. I've heard some people say that we've gotten less bang for the buck recently, that as budgets have increased, that new discoveries have not increased at equal rates. Well, I think that view is debatable. It's hard to argue that very recent advances, which discovered gravitational waves, RNA vaccines, CRISPR-Cas9, large language models, they've been spectacular breakthroughs, and all in the last few years. But faced with international competition for leadership, we still need to innovate to deliver more for less. So one of my biggest concerns is that pending science budget reductions are going to lead to an overly conservative system of selecting projects to fund, resulting in little high-risk, high-reward research being funded. This graph shows that despite increases to the science budgets over the last few decades, that the success rate for science proposals has fallen dramatically. As peer review is the most common method for reviewing NSF and NIH proposals, I fear that this selection mechanism breaks down as reviewers are looking for reasons not to fund someone else's work. Because after all, if only 1 out of 10 or fewer proposals is being funded, the more other people who get funding, it only hurts your own chances. Success rates are now half of what they were during the heyday of the endless frontier, and this red spot that you see at the bottom is NSF's estimate as of today, I think, that success rates will fall into the single digits with their budget mark for 2026. Now, in terms of mitigating conservatism of peer review, I believe that one of the most important steps we could take right now is to do a data-informed analysis of various approaches to proposal review to ensure that truly innovative proposals are succeeding. Peer review is not the only choice, but whether we modify peer review or use some other approach, it is important to fund innovation. Any approach that we select should be based on evidence and expertise, not on opinion or ideology. Okay, action number 2. I'm suggesting here that we create a national research strategy. Now, no sensible business person would attempt to run a multi-billion-dollar enterprise without a strategy. And yet, that is exactly what we are doing with our research enterprise. The fact that the current enterprise is being disrupted as it never has before in the last 70 years actually provides an impetus to make change. So, there we go. In the current state, the U.S. has no strategy. But many other countries, including China, Norway, Germany, and Japan, maximize their investment in R&D through strategic planning, primarily through an apolitical NGO. The benefits include long-term stability for key sectors. What university or what company wants to invest in expensive personnel or expensive facilities if all the funding in that area could go away next year or the year after? Without a strategy, these research performers are basically gambling. Any U.S. strategy must include all of the funders, government, industry, philanthropy, et cetera, and all the performers of research to take advantage of the strengths of each sector and their interdependence on each other. Now, unfortunately, in the U.S., budget marks have become the default strategy. As much as I respect the efforts of our legislators to do what is best for the nation, budgets are actually not a strategy. This animation from the New York Times shows the proposed changes to NSF budget for 2026. Major changes not based on a comprehensive strategy of how to regain U.S. leadership involving all funders and performers. I should add that the approach prior to this year of basing budgets mostly on modest alterations to whatever was funded the year before, that's not a strategy either. So any national strategy needs to accommodate both basic research and S&T for public good, because that is where the government really needs to step in. Basic research for which applications haven't yet been discovered, so industry's not going to do it, or applied research for public good that basically has no profit motive. And so it is a national interest for its citizens to support that kind of research. Gravitational waves are a great example of the first. You know, when quantum science was first developed, no one knew what it would be good for until it became the foundation of the information age. I feel the same way with gravitational waves. We don't know what we're going to do with them now, but I'm sure we will find a way to use gravitational waves. Warnings of impending disasters are an example of the latter. But industry is more than qualified to invest in research with commercial applications. However, I think it would be cruel to privatize disaster warnings and expect those who can pay for it will be saved and those who can't will die. This is a federal responsibility. Okay, action number 3, improve K-12 education. I spoke about this one last year, and frankly, it hasn't gotten much better. So this is not just about jobs. Science is so pervasive in every corner of our society that people need to be scientifically literate to make the right choices. For example, in the ballot box. There's hardly an occupation that has not been changed by science. Lawyers working on patent law, doctors, of course, but business people, politics, manufacturing, transportation. No matter what your walk of life, science is a valuable tool to have at your disposal to understand the language of it and understand the methodology. We should be ashamed that as a nation that built its might on science, we lag behind so many other countries in education of our youngest citizens. This is a survey that was done by STAC, the Science and Technology Action Committee. It demonstrates that improving STEM education is a very high priority for Americans. It's time we deliver on that mandate. Unfortunately, this is easier said than done. U.S. is at best middle of the pack internationally, and our children appear to get further behind every year that they go to school. They're worse in 8th grade than they were in 4th grade. Problems are, legendary. The very local nature of education decisions, which makes it hard to take action at the national level and have it have impact. There's absence of leadership from the Department of Education, and I don't know if we'll even have a Department of Education in the future. And I do very much like the idea of offering school choice. I think for no other reason, offering school choice allows us to experiment with different models to see what works in what kind of settings. I personally sent my own 3 daughters to faith-based schools, but I only did so after interviewing the science departments there to make sure that biology was taught acknowledging evolution, and that the fact that the Earth is 4.5 billion years old was also acknowledged. There need to be standards no matter what school kids go to. So let's start with K-12 education. I believe there are some better approaches that should be adopted as soon as possible. First, too many schools are still teaching science as a list of facts. And all the scientists in this audience know science is not a list of facts. Science is the best approach mankind ever devised for understanding the indisputable laws of nature. So instead of teaching facts, we should build on the innate curiosity of all children and teach them to be scientists by letting them loose to explore the world around them, using the scientific method. Next, we need to mitigate what are very large class sizes for many teachers and their discomfort with science curriculum. I think a great tool for that is AI. I saw an amazing presentation from Khan Academy of such a system that would truly be a game changer in our schools. Finally, we have to support informal learning at science museums, zoos, and aquaria. So many of them offer really well-designed hands-on demonstrations that enforce the principles of science. But beyond teaching everyone the science they need to know, we also have to take action to build the workforce of the future. We have to prepare U.S. citizens for the jobs we have now. This is the best way to mitigate our current dependence on international talent. So this slide shows that we can't even fill the jobs we have now, even with immigration at the level that it is. These data are from biomedical research areas where in every case between 20% and 40% of the jobs can't be filled with qualified applicants. And these are good paying jobs. And the declining availability is not just in biology. Here's an example from AI showing the rapid decline in international workers interested in pursuing employment in the U.S. Since 2018, the interest internationally has been falling, with a prominent dip, of course, for COVID, but it continued to drop down to just about zero today. Now, many of you might say, oh, that's no problem. We want U.S. people to take these jobs. But I'll have to tell you, in an internationally cutthroat competition for leadership in AI, we are doomed if we are not attracting the best and brightest to come here to work for us, no matter where they were born. And U.S. STEM workforce is not meeting the demand across the board. This chart shows that across all STEM fields, domestic talent either cannot meet the need or is insufficiently trained to be competitive with international talent. This is going to be further exacerbated as other countries are able to keep their best and brightest at home. I also think we need to seriously rethink STEM pathways to industry. Frankly, it is an indirect and circuitous route right now. Students seeking advanced training are mostly funneled into a system that was developed 70 years ago, not to fund people for industry, but to create more basic researchers. It's a long route with low wages. On the other hand, I point out to the law and business professions. They have created fast, efficient routes to professional degrees. The students, for the most part, take out loans to pay for that education, but they walk out the door with their law degree or their MBA and get six-figure salaries that allow them to pay those loans back. Why can't we do this in science? Well, it turns out we've started doing that. And there are some programs that are indeed training students for careers in science. I'm a particular fan of this one, the Keck Graduate Institute, simply because I was involved in its formulation early on. Its creation was motivated by discussions with leaders in the pharmaceutical industry who said they get all of these students, masters and PhDs, from universities who have no idea how to do a clinical trial, and they don't know how to get a drug through FDA approval. So Keck was formed in order to teach the students what they need to know for these careers in industry. Students come with a basic BA or BS in a science field, and at Keck, they learned the business side of the pharmaceutical industry, and they learned the soft skills, like how to work as part of a team, rather than taking a clue from their PI, who was a great person working alone, toiling in the lab. And they also give them hands-on industry experience during summer breaks and other times. This model is starting to spread nationally and has the particular advantage of being perfectly implementable in smaller colleges and universities that do not have the infrastructure to be a basic research juggernaut. And not just biotech can benefit from this approach. Why aren't we using this in AI, in material science, and many other fields that could help meet workforce needs with educating students for the jobs that we actually have? At the same time, many diverse organizations, including this one, the National Academies, also VAST, the Vision for American Science and Technology, the National Security Commission on AI, and the National Science Board have all called for re-upping the National Defense Education Act. For those of you who don't remember, and many of you are too young, in 1957, the Soviets launched Sputnik. The U.S. was caught on its back foot, and it passed the National Defense Education Act that created loans, scholarships, and funds for K-12 education. That effort put the U.S. first on the moon. We are facing another Sputnik moment right now. And we have to invest in the people, the talent, and the institutions that are going to get us that next big moonshot. I also think we need to improve on our research career pathways. And these are for students who are going to remain in basic research. Students who work at a university lab and are hoping someday to have their own lab and teach at a university. Right now, they spend too much time at low wages, hoping for opportunities which for most of them never materialize. The average science research lab employs between 2 to 5 graduate students and 1 to 2 postdocs. Now, if you run the numbers, what that means is that the average PI is duplicating himself or herself in terms of the skill set every 5 years. Now, our research budgets are not doubling every 5 years. They aren't even doubling every 10 years. And this is the primary reason why proposal success rates have been falling despite increases in the amount of funding for research in the past. So I believe a better approach is to create labs that are not dependent on so many students and postdocs to be competitive. AI, again, can help here by monitoring experiments rather than relying on research personnel to be on hand 24/7. AI can help run more samples to get statistical reliability in the results without requiring more hands in the lab. AI can also help with reproducibility by automating a lot of functions and taking out that potential for a person to make a small change in the protocol. These changes could right-size labs for the basic research jobs available while lowering costs and increasing productivity. Action number 5, reduce red tape and expand processes. As I mentioned before, this is another unforced error on our part, the dramatic increase in regulations which have basically axed productivity. So this number has the headline. Of the time that researchers have to devote to research, more than 40% is spent on paperwork. The pledge from the current administration offers an opportunity to help here. So, how do we recover lost productivity? Well, As I said, highly trained researchers are spending too much time on paperwork that can't be passed along to their university to do because of the cap on administrative costs in research grants. So this is a really poor use of researcher training, time, talent, and funding to do this paperwork. If we come up with a reboot for the endless frontier, it provides an opportunity to rethink how to accomplish regulatory compliance. I'm not going to predict what the answer may be, but there are some models we can look at. For example, I can fill out my tax paperwork in an afternoon and be done for the year. But if I'm audited, I better be ready to show up at the IRS office with that cardboard box with all the receipts and all the documentation that wasn't required on the form. Maybe we need an audit approach rather than everyone filling out endless paperwork. Or AI can also be a solution here to unload some of the burden. You can imagine a system that has access to the proposal, to the CVs of the PIs, and basic university backroom budgeting functions and things like that. And AI could fill out the majority of the paperwork such that the PI only has to look it over and sign it. Okay, action number 6. Again, another unforced error is the U.S. retreat from international collaborations. There is no better time to do this than with the growing number of scientifically advanced nations and the growing cost of cutting-edge facilities. After all, U.S. researchers are the collaborators of choice. Look at the large number of international collaborations that the U.S. enjoys. We squander opportunities by not taking advantage of the fact that international colleagues want to work with us. And we only disadvantage ourselves by not taking advantage of partnerships internationally. When I started out my career, it was possible for a single university to have a linear accelerator. Now, a cutting-edge facility and high-energy physics is beyond the reach of an individual nation and must be done internationally. With the current budget situation in the U.S., I'm worried that facilities budgets for ocean exploration, space exploration, and polar research are all going to be cut drastically. We will erode U.S. opportunities without international collaboration and cooperation. And yet the trend recently is to do just the opposite. These international collaborations are particularly successful when the U.S. has already welcomed researchers from those countries with whom we want to collaborate to work to be educated here in the U.S. Or when these international colleagues go back to their home country and bring with them the connections that they've made while being educated into the U.S. For that reason, I cannot understand why we want to discourage international students from studying in the U.S. In addition to the collaboration advantages, we also benefit economically from the influx to the U.S. economy from these students as they pay tuition and rent and everything else. Education as an export returns more to the U.S. economy than natural gas or soybeans. Finally, the last action is we need to rebuild trust. And we need to rebuild trust across the political spectrum. I recall when science was a bipartisan issue, and we need to make it that again. Trust must be earned and re-earned over and over again. It can't be assumed. There's been some rebound in public trust of science after some, again, unforced errors during the pandemic. Unfortunately, the rebound has not been uniform across the political spectrum. The public honestly believes that STEM can help solve our problems. Now, What we need to do is assure them that science is working for the benefit of all citizens. The most important action that scientists can take now is to listen to everyday science, to everyday citizens. Get out of our own little science communities and make yourself available to people who otherwise might not even know personally a scientist. We need to understand the issues that confront them today and talk about the ways that science is working to address their problems right now. I've heard many scientists talk about, oh, well, we could tout the cell phones and the internet and miracle cures for diseases. But all of that is in the past, and it's largely taken for granted. People are no longer connecting that to past investments in science. After all, few Americans today were even alive when polio was an epidemic, taking lives and maiming citizens for the rest of their lives. Science offers hope for cures for what ails people, and the message we need to give is that funding science is funding hope. Hope for the future. So, in closing, I hope I've convinced you that our business as usual path that we were on for many years, since 2007, rising above the gathering storm, has failed us. The U.S. is no longer leading in key technologies. We are not producing enough STEM professionals to fill the available jobs, and it's becoming difficult to rely on immigration. We have an opportunity to regain international leadership by spurring innovation, by creating a national strategy, improving K-12 education, rethinking STEM pathways, reducing red tape to increase efficiency, benefiting from international partnerships, and making science a nonpartisan issue again. My bottom line is we need to do what America has always done and done very well. We have to innovate to the next version of Endless Frontier. Get out ahead and then wait, decades hopefully, for others to catch up again. So thank you very much for your attention today, and I would like to invite Kelvin Drogemeyer up to the stage to introduce our panel.